I'm so excited that we're doing this because I've wanted to do it for a while. I'm super interested in public engagement. And I always fantasize about people putting microphones in my face and asking me my opinion about various things. And it's not done often enough. But my real interest in this, when I used to teach 400 a long time ago, I would show clips of Margaret Mead, who I'm hoping most of us know that name, Margaret Mead, cultural anthropologist. She would be interviewed in the 70s and go on like what amounts to Jimmy Kimmel and Phelan's show. It would be Merv Griffith and Dick Cavett.
Yeah.
And she would be asked to comment on things like the Vietnam War or the women's movement. And to me, it was so clear her anthropological perspective was shaping the way she narrated these important events. And aside from Jane Goodall, it was obvious to me that anthropologists we didn't really have a presence publicly that in a way that I would define as public intellectualism. And Mead was so compelling. I felt myself wishing for that time and opportunity again. So I'm so happy to have this event because in our department, as many of the students know, we have two professors that not only have classes about public engagement, but also take it very seriously in their own work. And so this was an opportunity to invite Dr. Brown and Dr. LaBelle to also invite you all to comment on the work you've done in their classes, and also for them to sort of outline their perspective on the significance of public engagement. So Dr. Brown is a University Distinguished Professor. She's a cultural anthropologist, and she's many things, but one thing that is happening is she's retiring. And so I was really adamant that I wanted this to happen and get her perspective before we didn't have access to her anymore. So welcome, Dr. Brown, and thanks for bringing your students. Dr. LaBelle is an archaeologist and teaches a class on public archaeology. And as I've known him for 15, 16 years, and I have always been aware of the level of engagement he plugs his students into. So we are really well positioned in this department to discuss these important issues. And they're so important to me that I want them to be a strategic goal of the department so that faculty and students focus on public engagement. So that's the intro. And I now would like our student participants to say your name and just a quick who you are, a major, PhD student, whatever. And can we start with Ray?
Hi, I'm Ray Sumner. I am a third-year PhD student here at CSU. I work under Dr. LaBelle. I also did my MA here before that in the history department. So I've been on campus for about the past 5 years, and my research is on the conflict that resulted after the Sand Creek Massacre between the U.S. military, the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Lakota in northeastern Colorado, Nebraska, and Kansas.
Okay, Hallie?
Hi, everyone. My name is Hallie Pelton. I work for the Medicine Bow Route National Forests and Thunder Basin National Grassland. Before that, I did my undergraduate and master's degree working with Dr. Jason LaBelle at CSU. And I have worked for the Forest Service ever since I graduated. So thank you for having me.
Next, Amanda.
Hi, I'm Amanda. I'm a third year triple majoring in anthropology, geography, and environmental politics and policy. And I got involved by taking a class with Dr. Brown.
Thank you. Cody?
Yeah, hi, I'm Cody Cook. I'm a third year undergraduate, and I'm a double major in English and history with a focus in creative writing. And same as Amanda, I first got into public scholarship and anything like this by taking a class with Professor Brown.
And then finally, Zoe. how do we deal with this? The mic is like, sounds like a duck. What can she do? Can you try now? Say something.
So.
Okay, Zoe is a senior as she sorts this out. Zoe is a senior. She's a double major in cultural anthropology and geography. Do you want to maybe say something? Let's see if you're any better.
Okay, how's it now?
Yeah.
Yeah, great.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm a senior double major in cultural anthropology and geography, and I also took Dr. Brown's public anthropology class, but then I was also a participant in the 2019 ethnographic field school with Dr. Brown as well.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks, students. So for the next segment, I'm going to ask our faculty some quick fire questions about the topic of the seminar today. So Jason, let's start with you. Can you define what you believe is a public intellectual? What is a public intellectual?
Sure. I mean, I think it's a faculty member's ethical and moral obligation to be a public intellectual. I mean, take all our training, our experiences, our research, and we share with the public. And there's so many different faces of the public. And that's the point is that it's so diverse. And we work for a land-grant university, and that's fundamental to our mission of a land grant is that we should be providing these ways, resources, our knowledge, our expertise to the various stakeholders out in the community. And so we do this on a pretty routine basis.
Kate, how about you? Public intellectual, how do you define it?
I might define it in a similar way to an extent, but I think I vary a little bit with Jason. I would say it's a highly educated person who engages in public discourse about certain issues. But I don't think they have to be an academic, and I don't think all academics have to be public intellectuals. I think that there is a role for public intellectuals that's very important, and I think it would be great to have a whole lot more of them. I'm not sure all kinds of research are made for that, given the specialization of the kind of inquiry that happens today. And I will talk about other limitations on becoming a public scholar today. But I think that the reference to Margaret Mead and Carl Sagan and, you know, in more recent times, Noam Chomsky and Cornel West, and now Ta-Nehisi Coates, for example, writer for The Atlantic, does lots of interviews. And there's so many opportunities that are out there. I think that a public intellectual is someone who conveys a sense of wonder and maybe a degree of skepticism. But they are not fatalists and they are not pessimists. So I believe that public intellectuals have a kind of sense of possibilities for change, and that's what motivates a lot of us to take on that kind of work. And I think there's something about trust, that the public sees a public intellectual as somebody trustworthy, because you push on the argument and you know, there's more there. There's more there. There's a deeper understanding, so it holds up. And I also think that a public intellectual tends to ask big questions.
So Kate, maybe you can transition into the next rapid fire question.
Sure.
Do you ever read on why public scholars have receded from the public eye? I believe that's true. I'm curious if you think that's true and why our voices have been diminished.
I think our voices have been diminished for sure. And I think it's a convergence of a lot of things. I think, first of all, we live in a widespread anti-intellectual environment. We've all experienced that, you know, very closely in the last 4 years or so. But I think it's been a longer phenomenon than that. And I think there are a number of factors. Like one, the explosion of access to knowledge. You know, you can get on, my mom, 91, will do a Google search to learn something. I mean, my 4-year-old nephew does the same thing. Wikipedia, blog posts, YouTube, social media. These are the recent phenomenon of our times, unlike the quiz shows in the 50s that, you know, really TV was all you had, or radio. So I think the impact of that is that knowledge that was locked up in the academy and required engagement with intellectuals producing it to convey it is no longer the case. We're not gatekeepers anymore. And in terms of the diminished kind of presence of public intellectuals. I think that's partly has to do with the fact that social media has kind of fragmented our collective attention and given rise to niche consumption of media and information and entertainment. And then there's also this specialization of knowledge production that I think makes it hard. This is what I was saying in the first thing, to actually think about becoming a public intellectual. Your knowledge is very specialized, and it tends to not coincide with necessarily the big questions, like Ralph Nader said about his Harvard experience. They make you smart by making you narrow. So I think there's that. And then I think also the cost of a college education has diminished the value of the perception of people who live in this space. And expert knowledge is just not valued the same.
So, Jason, how about you? You think our voices have diminished, and why?
Well, I mean, I agree with almost everything that Kate had to say there. I mean, the days of Johnny Carson are over. I mean, in terms of attention span, all sorts of things, and specialization, things like that. But I also think that we have to make a case for ourselves. You know, if you wait for opportunities to come, you know, grab you, they're few and far between. So you have to make your own opportunities. On archaeology's side, I mean, there's an inherent interest in what we do, and so there's a lot of curiosity and kind of people wanting to hear what we have to say, and so we kind of capitalize that on the time in terms of all the different kinds of public things that we do. Now, how you get to a much higher level is a little bit different. So I guess it depends on the scale at which you're trying to become a public intellectual. I mean, at a national, international level, or in your local community or region. And from our perspective, I mean, the local and regional thing is what we try to do, because that's where our populace lives, and that's the ones we're trying to affect. So I think part of it is what kind of audience you're trying to reach and what kinds of messages you're trying to convey.
I also think we've become sort of chicken shitty a little bit. And what I mean by that is, and I don't want to take up much time, but I do think we're a little bit afraid of cancel culture, and it's coming at us from both the right and left. Mm-hmm. And I know that, you know, the biological anthropologists are often afraid to speak about evolution because we're afraid of the backlash from religious folks or whatever. We don't know how to handle the pushback effectively. But maybe we can talk about that toward the end. The last faculty question. So, Jason, I want to start with you this time. What is it about our current time that make our voices so important? Do you think there's something unique about this moment in time?
Well, I mean, getting back to what Kate said earlier, I mean, we're not the only voices out there. And that's the first thing that we need to recognize, is that, you know, we do have distinct voices based upon our experience, our wisdom, and we should share that information, but we're not the only voices out there. And we need to let other folks, you know, be at the microphone to talk about these issues. But, you know, given our experience, you know, we have really distinct ways of navigating these landscapes, knowing the terrain, and presenting, you know, topics that we know a lot about in terms of understanding the problems and the issues, but really lending our expertise to hopefully try to solve some of these issues. And again, it's part of a coalition of people. It can't just be, you know, from top down. And I think that that's a change strategy as well, that we're not the sole voice as we once, you know, thought we were, but we need a multivocal kind of group together. But we do have expertise, and so we do have things to share with a greater audience. Okay, thank you. How about you, Kate? What's special about the current moment?
There's a lot very special about the current moment. This whole unfolding of the U.S. catastrophe with the coronavirus has put on a grand display the staggering dysfunction of our social systems for all the world to see. You know, we're leading the world in coronavirus infection rates. We're leading the world in coronavirus deaths. And all of that has made clear our dissociation from expert knowledge. You know, God, the kind of implosion of the CDC under the last administration is just chilling. I think, you know, we've seen the undeniable disproportionate impacts of these infections and deaths, and the vaccine distribution on Black, Indigenous, and people of color. It's a moment, you know, it's not like any moment of my lifetime. I've never seen the curtain so fully drawn back on the contradictions between the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what our society stands for, and what our society I mean, historically, we know that public intellectuals have always emerged during times of crisis. This is well documented. The Civil War, Vietnam War, civil rights, women's rights. So we have this opportunity, and I do believe, as an optimist that I am, that the COVID era has like wedged open a space for public intellectuals like no time in our recent past. So I think we do have critical opportunity we need to move into, as Jason said.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move to our students on the panel. And I know that the audience is interested to hear about your experiences, how you came to care about public anthropology, and maybe give us an example of the work you've done. So I want to start with Amanda and then go to Cody. So Amanda, can you give us a window there on how you got interested in what you've done?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been really lucky. Being a double major with Anth and geography has been a really awesome opportunity because you get different perspectives from both cultural Anth and cultural geography and kind of the different approaches they take to engaging with the public with that. But the first real public class I took was with Dr. Brown. And I was really nervous going into it because I didn't really know what public anthropology was. I kind of had a gist of it, but never really had opportunities to engage with the public myself. And then Kate had us do lots of assignments where we had to write blogs and recruit people to actually read them. And we had to submit to newspapers opinion pieces. And our final project was a podcast, which was a really fantastic opportunity we got to do through CSU. And it was kind of all about building those mental muscles about how to engage with people and how to effectively communicate with them and how to kind of bridge this gap that is existing right now between academics and non-academics, and try to work through some of those cultural barriers that aren't always addressed. So yeah, that's how I came about it. And now I realize that I'm super passionate about it. So
That's great, Amanda. Thank you. Cody, let's go to you and then Zoe.
Yeah, I agree with everything Amanda said. I'm very passionate about the things that I've learned taking Professor Brown's course. I guess I should start with, I'm from Louisiana, and the Gulf Coast is something that after moving away from it, moving to Colorado, I really started to appreciate it for everything that is there and everything it's about. And I was walking down a hall in the Clark building when I saw a flyer for Professor Brown's summer course in Corpus Christi. And I was immediately interested in it because it was something to do with the Gulf Coast. And it looked like it was right up my alley in the things that I was interested in. I'm very interested in the petrochemical presence on the Gulf Coast. So I went to a meeting to talk about that summer course, and that's where I met Professor Brown. And obviously the summer course didn't happen because it was last summer, but she invited me to join her public anthropology class the following semester. And that's where I really started to get into this kind of stuff. And I just found my outlet. Like, I really loved it. And what I especially loved was the emphasis in her class of connecting what you want to say to an audience that needs to hear it. I've always tried to know everything that I can about my state, about Louisiana, and I try to tell my friends about how much I love it. Sometimes they don't like to hear me talk about it, but I ended up so this past August, when Hurricane Laura hit, a jump to last August, I went down and I actually did some work down in Louisiana, and I took some notes, I took pictures, I helped out any way I could. And when I came back, Professor Brown had me talk about it in class. And I just loved that that opportunity to share what I saw, and not only just what I saw, but why it was important to talk about what was happening and what had happened and why it had happened. And this past semester, after having gone through the Hurricane Laura experience, after having taken Professor Brown's awesome course, I took a creative nonfiction writing class. And the major project in that class was an essay that I wrote about that experience of going down to Hurricane Laura. And it was just my place to synthesize everything that I loved about my home state, but also all of the problems that I had learned about taking Professor Brown's course, bringing in coronavirus and the our really difficult responses to it, bringing in climate change and how that fits into how we adapt, what it means to live in a state that's going to be affected by climate change in the next 50 years. And after taking Professor Brown's course, I couldn't help but enjoy writing that essay and writing down my experiences, but for an audience that I think needs to hear it. And I really want to work with that essay and try to get it published somewhere. Right now, it's just a coursework thing. But after taking Professor Brown's course, I can't stop trying to get what I want to say out there about not just Louisiana, but everything that connects back to Louisiana. And I don't really have time to go into it now, but bottom line is that Professor Brown's course has really put me in the place that I feel like I need to be.
That's great. Zoe, how about you? And then we'll go to Hallie.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what both Amanda and Cody had to say. I mentioned that I took the class as well last fall, but that I also did the field school in 2019. And that was like kind of my first introduction to the world of public anthropology and just kind of ethnographic methods and things like that. So we basically just kind of went door to door trying to get people's stories, doing surveys and participatory mapping from victims of Hurricane Harvey. Just kind of collecting data and seeing how people's own perceptions of risk and exposure to hurricanes interacted with like various social factors and how that kind of interacted with also their ability to recover. So after spending a few weeks doing that, then we were able to compile all of that information into a big presentation and a report that we presented to the local like residents at the public library. So that was a really cool opportunity to just kind of share basically their stories back to the community in a way that like these are the things that had impacted them and what they were talking about together. But just to have it compiled all in one place for them to see what they were talking about in a way that was potentially available to everyone. And then about a year later, we were able to get that research published, which was tailored maybe a bit more to the academic sphere, but still ultimately like a very public approach that was like designed for anyone and everyone. So then being able to integrate that sort of knowledge and understanding of public anthropology and talking to the world about the things that they're experiencing, that was like having that base knowledge and coming into the course last fall, it was like the perfect combination of all those things. So
great, thank you. Holly and then Ray.
Oh, that sounds like such fascinating research. That was great to listen to. So I first got started with Dr. Jason Lavelle's public archaeology course, and I believe that was before my field school. Dr. J, you might have to. And that's what really inspired me to continue down the road. And just listening to everybody speak, I realized that Dr. J in his infinite wisdom, in that course was talking about the different avenues of public archaeology specifically and public anthropology. And at that point, I was like, man, I want to work for a federal government agency. And that's my goal, because I want to be a public land manager, and I want to cater towards serving the people, which is ultimately what the Forest Service does. So thank you for that trip down memory lane. But that was the beginning, and I continued on to get my master's degree with Dr. Lavelle, and every project that we worked on, there was always how the public interacts with that information, because ultimately, if we're collecting information about our past, the goal is to share it. And if we're just putting it in a shoebox and storing it in the back of our closet, then we know about it and nobody else does. And I realize that there's sensitivities and there's things that we cannot share. And I experience this in my current position I do a lot of compliance work, and I work with tribes, and there's sacred sites that tribes do not want to share with members of the public. And that's something that I find the line between giving enough information so that we're informed, but also respecting other cultures and other people. So
That's great. Yeah, keep going.
No, that'll do.
Thanks. What, remind us, when did you graduate with your BA, and then when was the MA?
Bachelor's was 2013 and my master's was 2017.
Yeah. So in many ways, you're living with this notion of what you were passionate about, right? Do you feel like you're getting there? You're in that job arena? Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, no, I am very fortunate that I was able to get on the road that I got on as early as I did and land my dream job. And here I am. We're working public land, and I believe in it. So
thank you. Yeah, that's great. Ray, with that, it's just the mailman. Hold on.
I guess my background, coming out of a public history program and a digital history, I had an interest in it and being kind of that storytelling aspect coming into archaeology. I got into archaeology through Dr. Van Buren's historical archaeology class in my MA program, and then I took Jason's field school, which really convinced me to come over and not get a history PhD, but to get a archaeology, to be more well-rounded in ability to address history of people and how we do things. In working with the CMPA and with Dr. LaBelle, as Hallie said, everywhere all the projects, there's always public interest in them. And so I really saw the power of that. And he helped me get in touch with my own research. I'm working northeastern Colorado, where it is not federal land. It is not state land for the most part. So if you want to do archaeology on the sites that I'm working on, I've had to go out into the community and build a relationship with the community to get them invested, so that the landowners, to build that trust relationship with them. Also working with private collectors, metal detectorists, and others. That can be a touchy subject in archaeology, but finding that balance with being able to utilize what they have collected, because there's a huge amount of information. And northeastern Colorado, it's kind of like Marie Taylor's district defense, MA defense, showed the map of the lack of research that's done out there. Sedgwick County has a few hundred archaeological sites recorded with the state. Larimer County has about over 10,000 when you talk buildings and structures and everything that have been evaluated. So just that need to get other people out there and build that. And I've done that a lot through giving talks and going out from, whether it's high schools, talking to the Rotary Club, the Lions Club, and even conversations at the SAAs in Albuquerque, where someone in line at a book display, we were talking, and invited me to come and talk in Santa Fe at the Santa Fe Symposium, because they were interested in this area of a story that had not really been told, and spreading that word. And so that's really how I try to do it in my research.
Thank you. So now with the students, we're going to enter a little bit of a lightning round, where I want you to, in a minute, describe the top 3 ways anthropologists can reach out to a broader public in order to make a difference. So what are your 3 top ways for anthropologists to do that? We're going to lead with Zoe and then go to Hallie. You're muted.
Sorry. I'd say that my top 3 ways all have to do with being online, and like Dr. Brown was talking about, just utilizing your own platforms, and whether that's in her class, we wrote blogs on like our WordPress website. So something like that, and sharing it wherever you can, but then also utilizing, like, as Gen Z of an answer as this is, like things like TikTok that are like, I see 17-year-old kids like making videos about super like important social topics that like we're all studying and researching, that are like, they don't even know that that's what they're doing. They're just talking about their lived experience, so contributing to that, I think, is a huge opportunity there. And I think that to not like really capitalize on that would be a mistake for public anthropology, to just really get in there and utilize all these platforms that are huge right now and making our voices heard in that way.
Okay, Hallie.
And I'll speak just from a land manager's perspective, but number 1 is education, and not necessarily, we all are well versed in the power of education, but it's that word of mouth piece. And as soon as people start getting excited about information, they want to talk about it and they share it. And that's a really great way to spread valuable information. I'd say number 2 would be putting information where the public goes. So for me, that's putting it at trailheads, putting it at interpretive sites. You could be standing right in front of a sheep herder's cabin, and maybe you want to learn a little bit more information about it. So instead of making the public come to the information, put the information where they go. And then my last one would also be using online technology. And we have amazing social media platforms, but we also have amazing online mapping platforms like AGOL. And one of the things that I envision is someday creating, so Nat Geo has that, you can have a dinosaur in your living room. I don't know if anybody's seen that, but imagine going to a Native American teepee ring site and scanning a QR code on your phone, and then all of a sudden you're looking at teepees. And but that's my top 3.
That's great. Okay, Cody and then Ray.
Yeah, what Hallie said about education, I think something important that could happen within the universities is some more cross-college communication. I know in Professor Brown's class, half of the things we talked about also could have been talked about in economy classes or business classes or philosophy classes or a number of other disciplines. All of this information seems to overlap, so some cross-communication would, I think, definitely help get people talking to other people. And I also think outreach programs with local schools would be a really important way. Growing up in middle school and high school, the local petrochemical industries would have like expositions where it would be one of our field trips every year to have the corporations come and talk to us about the work they do. So kind of the same thing, but with public scholarship going to elementary schools and maybe bringing them to archaeological sites like y'all have been talking about. I think that would be a really cool way to get the public engaged. And I think my number one biggest suggestion would be, I think podcasts are a very, very popular medium through which a lot of people are getting information. And Professor Brown, I think you would definitely belong on this podcast. Professor LaBelle, I've never taken your class, but I think you would also kill a conversation with Joe Rogan on his podcast. I would just love to see the kind of stuff that y'all talk about be talked about in a 3-hour conversation with someone like Joe Rogan, because just millions of people listen to his podcast. So anything like that to, like Hallie said, go where the public's going. I think that's important.
Thank you, Cody. Ray and then Amanda.
I think to touch on a couple of different areas, I think one is you look at involving the public in projects is a great way. And I think that can be a challenge sometimes because you have to morph what you normally would do to make it accommodating, to work with volunteers and things. You know, my own research, I didn't do what I wanted to do necessarily on metal detecting as I saw how the volunteers were going to work. So sometimes you have to work in, the plans and your timing to fit the volunteers and the public if you're trying to engage with them. I think spending time in the local communities, especially where you research with whether it Native American descendant communities, local descendant communities of other types in the region is important. And much as you do in working with a lot of Native American tribes, taking the time and investing in a much more developing a relationship and not making it just kind of like a business transaction that you get to know each other, hopefully eventually become partners, friends in these endeavors. And I think in a more general way, I'd say one thing, and I've been a little older involved in a number of nonprofits and local organizations. I think I see a lot of retired CSU professors involved in community organizations. I think it kind of goes to some that Dr. Brown and Dr. LaBelle talked about, specialization and the amount of stuff that everybody does now, that you don't see that the next generation of professors and academics and researchers and things involved as much from even social organizations, but even organizations such as historic preservation, history, archaeology. Dr. LaBelle participates in the avocational archaeology organization, but the amount of people seems to have drastically decreased probably in the last 30 to 40 years than it would have been many years ago, when a lot of these private organizations, public organizations, were actually started by academics, and now they're completely taken over by avocationals.
Okay, Thank you for that. Now we're going to fold our faculty back in to the conversation. And for
Amanda.
What?
You forgot Amanda.
Oh, Amanda, I'm sorry. I was worried that I was going to forget somebody, and I did. Amanda.
You're so fine. Mine are really similar to everyone else's, so I can speed through. The only specific word that I would bring out is framing. Know your audience. Know who you're speaking to. Know what matters to them. Know what doesn't matter to them. You know, if I'm giving a climate change presentation to people who don't believe in climate change, I better be prepared to make that a unique presentation than if I'm presenting to students at the University of Boulder or here, right? So definitely know who you're talking to and approach that cautiously. Also language. Language is super powerful. Language is amazing. Rhetoric is amazing. Use language that people want to listen to. I'm really big into climatology. If I go and give a presentation and use all my climatology lingo and say words that people don't know or don't care about, they're not going to listen to me and they're not going to care about what I say. So definitely focus, again, cater your language to who you're speaking to. And then finally, pretty much what everyone else said, don't be afraid to try new things. Like do a podcast, try to make an app, try to reach people in ways that our fields generally haven't reached them before. I don't know about anybody else here, but when I tell people I'm majoring in anthropology and geography, they're like, ooh, what is that? They're like, oh, maps or the store. So most people don't know what we do, and we have a lot of really cool things to say. So if we find ways to reach them by trying new things, they'll listen because what we do is really awesome. So that's it. That's all I got.
Amanda, that was great. And it's a great segue into the last prompt. So there are problems where our expertise is really would be needed and in many ways should be required. And so I wanted the group, including faculty, to comment specifically on what kinds of problems public anthropology can work to solve. What kinds of problems in today's world? So let's start this time with Ray.
I think kind of a general one that really can help is reminding us that we can have discussions about topics and we don't all have to agree. You can have different perspectives. Everybody brings things into a conversation, and out of that, hopefully, everybody takes away different information and informs their own position and grows. So I think that's really highlighting the ability, kind of what the old mantra of the university is, having a place to come and debate ideas, is taking that back out and building bridges, as other people have mentioned, working with different target audiences that may not necessarily fully support what you're doing or agree with your viewpoint on it, but just having those professional and cordial discussions is really something that we need to remind ourselves that we're capable as a society of doing, and that we just don't all have conversations to the people that already agree with us or hold our viewpoint. And I think it kind of pulls into that specialization that Dr. Brown mentioned. We're getting so focused that even in our disciplines, we just specialize and don't even talk to the larger archaeologist conversation, let alone the whole four field, because we produce so much information now. It's hard to do that.
Mm-hmm. Good points. Holly, how about you? What are the problems of today you think public anthropology can help solve or comment on?
Well, for me, it's catered towards preservation, and I think that I have an opportunity to work with other resources and manage land that preserves multiple lenses, but we can look at the past, and public land ultimately serves as a respite for all the other stuff that's happening in our world today. So for me, it's just creating that environment where we're preserving and saving our resources for present and future generations. So that's what I'm working towards.
Thank you. Zoe and then Cody.
Yeah, kind of like Dr. Brown mentioned at the beginning, just not gatekeeping information. I think that public anthropology has a huge potential to really get out the information that we're all already having huge conversations about, and most people, whether you're in an academic discipline or not, are talking about these things. So being able to provide more approachable conversations that are based in academia and facts and, broad studies that are, well informed, but also coming from a place that is understandable and impactful for everyone, and just not keeping that information to ourselves. And I think that's huge.
Thank you, Cody, and then Amanda.
Yeah, the first and biggest problem that comes to mind for me is climate change. I mentioned earlier that I'm from Louisiana, and the Gulf Coast as a whole is a place where climate change will be felt hard and very quickly in the next few years, definitely within my lifetime. Real physical, possibly scary change will hit the Gulf Shore. And getting that mindset to the people who live there, I think is very important. Just from my own experience of growing up along the Gulf Coast, is not many people, even if they do believe in it, not many people care about 20 years into the future. They're worried about having a job next year. So what's the point of worrying 20 years down the line? And I think public scholarship and public anthropology specifically can be that connection, connecting people to what they worry about now to what actually will happen in the next 50 years. And climate change for me is the biggest issue. It just seems to cover so many different things. It covers the economy. It covers the way we need to rethink energy grids. It connects all of these problems for me. And I think public anthropology can be that voice to get these concerns to the people that, these concerns are going to hit in the face in the next 15, 20 years. And my own personal experience really brings that home for me. So climate change is the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, and preservation of concerns that Holly has. Okay, Amanda, and then we're going to fold the faculty back in.
I would argue a little bit broader. I would say public anth can address any issue that anthropology addresses. I mean, we have archaeologists here, we have cultural anthropologists here. I mean, if we had, physical anthropologists here, they would be able to talk about problems that they could solve with public anth too. Public anth is really just the ability to relate your research to people and how it impacts them. And so anything that an anthropologist can research, we can find ways to communicate that meaningfully to the people, like Cody said, that it's going to impact the most. So yeah.
Thank you, Amanda. So coming back to Dr. Brown and Dr. LaBelle, what in your mind are the big problems that public-facing anthropology can solve? Let's start with Jason.
Well, I mean, we have different themes that we in our lab kind of deal with. Here in the Front Range where we all live, it's about sprawl and development and how quickly this landscape's changed, and how archaeology and history can give a completely different perspective of land use, concept of openness, concepts of wilderness, these things that we take for granted what those words mean and think they have very specific meanings. But when you look at the historical and archaeological lenses, they tell completely different stories. And the time scales of history and archaeology allow us to have conversations like Cody was saying that, let's not talk about tomorrow, let's not talk about 5 years, let's talk about 20, 50, 100 years in the future and what our communities will look like. And now is the time to be planning them, not retro planning them 20 years from now. We can't go back. So that's how we use our themes locally. Again, it's not the technical stuff of the archaeology itself, because it's really abstract to most people. The concepts of land and development, everybody's affected by that. Everyone sees it on a daily basis. So that's how we really engage diverse audiences with our themes locally.
Thank you, Jason. Kate, what are your thoughts about the most important problems?
I really think it's for at least for cultural anthropology, I believe we are just destined to show and demonstrate the interconnectedness of so many of these issues: race, health, gendered relations, economy, politics, media, technology, everything to do with the environment. These are not really discrete issues. And as I have to work really hard to understand how things connect. And to me, that is a really big task. It's a big question. How do they connect? But I think we can approach it. I mean, I was really thrilled when I saw a news release indicating that Biden was calling for more social science. I mean, we definitely, I think, feel the need for science with coronavirus, the vaccine. Science has taken on a glow again, I feel like, because the CDC is trying to resurrect itself as a reputable agency for the dissemination of very trustworthy knowledge about health. Social science hasn't found its voice yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the growing phenomenon of disasters and climate crises, all related to, you know, our ideas, our narratives, our sense of risk, our sense of place attachment. These are all connected, and we have to take whatever part of it we can, use that expertise, and then bring it out to the public so they can see that there are ways we can connect the dots. And I really think that, I mean, as Arthur Kleinman has said in his most recent book, A Passion for Society, it's all about suffering. He says it's suffering is what's underneath the problems that plague our society right now, and a true reflection of a society that is a high-functioning society, a well-being society, is one that takes its suffering people seriously and figures out how to care. And I think that's a big part, you know, species on the move, human displacement from climate change. These are all forms of suffering. Everything that we're talking about is a form of suffering that we could do better to acknowledge and reveal the kinds of dots that we know how to connect. And I think that kind of work would make a huge impact. And I do think that that wedge is opening a little bit for us right now because of the revelation of what COVID has revealed to the world and to us ourselves.
So this is the end of the formal program, but we have a nice 10-minute period of time to have an open conversation and also with our audience. I want to thank each of you. I have taken a lot of notes and have learned a lot about the perspectives you all have and the work that you've found really passion in. And it helps us as a department think through what engages students, because it helps us attract students, but it also helps us make the world a better place. So thank you so much for that. Please, let's take some questions, comments, or someone can offer a prompt that we can all talk about. Any questions or comments someone wants to share with the group? You can raise your hand. I think let me see if I can. I'll call on you if you would like to raise your hand. Maybe I'll put somebody on the spot. I see Andrew is in the audience. Andrew, are you listening? Because I know that you did blogs in your grad class, and you know, as a biological anthropologist, we have also kind of a unique perspective on this. Andrew, do you want to say anything?
Well, I didn't, but if I'm put on the spot, well, first of all, that was a fascinating panel, and I learned so much. I didn't even think I knew what that public anthropology was actually a phrase before this panel. And as this was going on, I kept thinking about, what is the relationship between bioanth and public anthropology? I think for most of us, it's just public communication of our science. I mean, some of us do it with like local schools. Some of us do press releases with certain articles. But I kept thinking if there was more that we can do, and people write like popular science books. But no, I agree with you, Micah. I mean, when you said, you know, quote unquote chicken shit, I think I would put myself in that category as well. I think there is a lot of anxiety, you know, talking publicly about our work because it evokes such strong emotions from certain sides, certain groups, certain circles. But I guess above the really kind of paths of least resistance, just like the press releases with our articles, the occasional visits to schools, I am really puzzled and really racking my mind if there is something more that we can do to make our work more public, more engaging, et cetera, et cetera. So not really a question, just a comment. I guess if people have any ideas or thoughts, I'd be happy to hear them.
Thanks, Andrew. John Pippin, I see your hand is raised.
Hey all, good to see everybody. I haven't seen some of your faces in a long time. And yeah, I love this panel, and I was so impressed, especially with the students. I'm already impressed with Jason and Kate, of course. No, but I've been doing a lot more like engaged scholarship, and I've been organizing with a union actually, and it's really fun because it's like the thing I'm noticing, and that I hear a lot from the union is we'll read a lot of scholarship that's right in my area of expertise, and then people will say things like, great, we've diagnosed the problem, now what? And like it's really started to sensitize me in my writing in general, and in my teaching a lot. It's like, what do you do now? And like I've really, I didn't expect that to be, I just never expected that to be something that I guess I cared so much about, but it really has like reinvigorated, I think, just like everything I do. And I really enjoy it now. And I just, every time I teach now, I'm just like, it's, Kate, you talked about like making those big connections, and it is a lot of work. I agree. And I find myself reading a lot more broadly than I have been reading in the past year. And, but then when I do that, it's like so much more powerful. So yeah, and I just thought all of the ideas were really good. But just the last thing I'll say is like the chicken shit point. I just really think the big thing I've learned is like academic publications are not the same as public engagement, and especially not the same as political action. And that's something I'm really, really noticing a lot. And I don't want to diminish academic publishing. Like I believe in it, and I think it's important, but yeah, it's just something that's really been connecting with me. So anyway, yeah, really enjoyed this panel. Y'all are great. Yeah.
Thanks, John. Kate, do you want to say anything, and then I'll call on Spencer?
Yeah, just very quickly. I think there's a kind of elephant in the room, and that is the fact that the institution itself does not support this work, and that is a punishment for almost, because it is an opportunity cost. If you decide to translate your work or convert it or make it accessible, you either have to be a full professor or you're going to take a hit in a way, because I think the institutions have not incentivized this kind of work. In fact, there's been a longstanding stigma about it, and that is a very big part of the problem. We need to create a rationale and an incentive system that makes people feel good about it. Like, this is going to be rewarded. This isn't something I do at the sacrifice of. I'm not a martyr for, the cause of trying to do something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Spencer.
Hey, quick one. This is mainly for archaeologists. I see a lot of public archaeologists, or people that describe them that way, as spending most of their time basically combating misinformation. So like the ancient alien stuff, ancient civilizations and the New World stuff, all that. I'm just curious to hear what the archaeologists' opinions are on how much time we should be devoting to that, or if it's just like, why even bother? People are gonna spread this stuff. It's gonna get around because it's entertaining, and yeah, I don't know, how much time should we spend in public engagement actually fighting this stuff, or is it an uphill battle?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Jason, do you have any comment to make about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll be talking about archaeology in the media in my public class after spring break. And, the issue is channels like Discovery and History, they fund these shows and the public watches them. And you can combat them. I mean, that certainly is what you're describing. But the other way is that we create our own media, and that we produce our own documentaries, and we produce our own work that can it compete? I don't know. It probably can't, but it needs to fill some of that void. And so, yeah, direct padding of that is one option, but we have to create our own. If you wait around for the right opportunity for somebody to approach you to do these things, it's probably not going to happen. And so you have to be entrepreneurial about making these things, you know. And Kate's made documentaries, I've made documentaries. I mean, these are things that you need to do to share the word that you're passionate about. Yeah, because that misinformation is just an epidemic in archaeology.
Yeah, I think that's true in human evolution as well, that we are spending a lot of time correcting this idea that we're basically Paleolithic people in 21st century clothing. Like, there's a lot of narrative we have to unpack. Stephanie, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, hi everybody. First of all, thanks. This panel is really reinvigorating. Kate really touched on kind of what I was going to say. So I guess I was just going to ask a question of, if we all realize that public anthropology is really, really important for the public and for our field, is there anything that we as a department can do to reward that kind of work? And more broadly than that, what can we do to advocate at an institutional level that CSU recognizes that kind of knowledge production and science communication in things like tenure applications? Like, what possibility do you think there might actually be to make that a value form of academic knowledge production?
It's a great question, Stephanie, that I will take, because I can tell you that this institution has really engaged at a high level with the notion of engaged scholarship. And our college in particular has sought counsel from folks at Michigan State and Oregon State, which I guess are two really superior institutions in terms of the way they deal with the land grant mission and extension generally, and engagement. And as chairs, we've all been encouraged to do code changes that allow the kind of work Kate and Jason have described in their classes and gotten their students involved in, the kind of work like that we can reward it. So our department hasn't done it yet, but I think as part of this strategic goal that I have around public engagement, that will be a part of it. So you're totally right. If you don't put this in the structure of the institution, then it is not rewarded in a meaningful way, and it needs to be. So we're at 1. Any other questions, comments? This has been so enjoyable. And I have to say, it's great to hear the students. I mean, I think this is always so important for us as a community to really listen to you all and see what the impact has been, right? We really see it.
If I could just, on the last one that Stephanie raised, I think I'd offer to the department, perhaps one thing you could do is you could build it into the coursework, especially for grad students, where they could do that. And if you could find a way to do it in the undergraduates, so you develop that culture in their own research and stuff, so that it's built in and not having to try to fit it in or be competing with all the other coursework. Much as you're saying with the faculty, that if you don't build the systems in for the students, they're not going to develop that understanding and that the prioritization of it in their own work.
Yeah, good point, Ray. Thank you. Again, I thank you. Big thank you to the panel. Big thank you to Kate and Jason. The two best in the business are here with us today, and I really want to thank you, and I want to acknowledge your work because it's so important for our students. So have a wonderful weekend, everyone, and thanks for attending.
Thanks so much, everybody. It was really fun.
Thanks for inviting me. It was great being here.
Great to see you. Yeah, thank you guys.